1. Skull on the crag. The woman on the horse reined in her weary steed. It stood with its legs wide braced, its head drooping, as if it found even the weight of the gold-tasseled red leather bridle too heavy. The woman drew a booted foot out of the silver stirrup and swung down from the gilt-worked saddle. She made the reins fast to the fork of a sapling and turned about, hands on her hips, to survey her surroundings. They were not inviting. Giant trees hemmed in the small pool where her horse had just drunk. Clumps of undergrowth limited the vision that quested under the somber twilight of the lofty arches formed by intertwining branches. The woman shivered with a twitch of her magnificent shoulders, and then cursed. She was tall, full-bosomed and large-limbed, with compact shoulders. Her whole figure reflected an unusual strength, without detracting from the femininity of her appearance. She was all woman, in spite of her bearing and her garments. The latter were incongruous, in view of her present environs. Instead of a skirt, she wore short, wide-legged silk breeches, which ceased a hand's breadth short of her knees, and were upheld by a wide silken sash worn as a girdle. Flaring-topped boots of soft leather came almost to her knees, and a low-necked, wide-collared, wide-sleeved silk shirt completed her costume. On one shapely hip, she wore a straight double-edged sword, and on the other a long dirk. Her unruly golden hair, cut square at her shoulders, was confined by a band of crimson satin. Against the background of somber, primitive forest, she posed with an unconscious picturesqueness, bizarre and out of place. She should have been posed against a background of sea clouds, painted masts and wheeling gulls. There was the color of the sea in her wide eyes. And that was as it should have been, because this was Valeria of the Red Brotherhood, whose deeds are celebrated in song and ballad wherever seafarers gather. She strove to pierce the sullen green roof of the arched branches and see the sky which presumably lay about it, but presently gave it up with a muttered oath. Leaving her horse tied, she strode off toward the east, glancing back toward the pool from time to time in order to fix her route in her mind. The silence of the forest depressed her. No birds sang in the lofty boughs, nor did any rustling in the bushes indicate the presence of any small animals. For leagues she had traveled in a realm of brooding stillness, broken only by the sounds of her own flight. She had slaked her thirst at the pool, but she felt the gnawings of hunger, and began looking about for some of the fruit on which she had sustained herself, since exhausting the food she had brought in her saddlebags. Ahead of her, presently, she saw an outcropping of dark, flint-like rock that sloped upward into what looked like a rugged crag rising among the trees. Its summit was lost to view amidst a cloud of encircling leaves. Perhaps its peak rose above the treetops, and from it she could see what lay beyond, if indeed anything lay beyond but more of this apparently illimitable forest, through which she had ridden for so many days. A narrow ridge formed a natural ramp that led up the steep face of the crag. After she had ascended some 50 feet, she came to the belt of leaves that surrounded the rock. The trunks of the trees did not crowd close to the crag, but the ends of their lower branches extended about it, veiling it with their foliage. She groped on in leafy obscurity, not able to see either above or below her, but presently she glimpsed blue sky, and a moment later came out in the clear, hot sunlight, and saw the forest roof stretching away under her feet. She was standing on a broad shelf, which was about even with the treetops, and from it rose a spire-like jut that was the ultimate peak of the crag she had climbed. But something else caught her attention at the moment. Her foot had struck something in the litter of blown dead leaves which carpeted the shelf. She kicked them aside and looked down on the skeleton of a man. She ran an experienced eye over the bleached frame, but saw no broken bones, nor any sign of violence. The man must have died a natural death, though why he should have climbed a tall crag to die she could not imagine. She scrambled up to the summit of the spire and looked toward the horizons. The forest roof, which looked like a floor from her vantage point, was just as impenetrable as from below. She could not even see the pool by which she had left her horse. She glanced northward, in the direction from which she had come. She saw only the rolling green ocean stretching away and away, with only a vague blue line in the distance to hint of the hill range she had crossed days before, to plunge into this leafy waste. West and east the view was the same, though the blue hill line was lacking in those directions. But when she turned her eyes southward, she stiffened and caught her breath. A mile away in that direction, the forest thinned out and ceased abruptly, giving way to a cactus-dotted plain. And in the midst of that plain rose the walls and towers of a city. Valeria swore in amazement. This passed belief. She would not have been surprised to sight human habitations of another sort, the beehive-shaped huts of the black people, or the cliff dwellings of the mysterious brown race which legends declared inhabited some country of this unexplored region. But it was a startling experience to come upon a walled city here, so many long weeks' march from the nearest outposts of any sort of civilization. Her hands tiring from clinging to the spire-like pinnacle, she let herself down on the shelf, frowning in indecision. She had come far, from the camp of the mercenaries by the border town of Sukhmet, amidst the level grasslands, where desperate adventurers of many races guard the Stygian frontier against the raids that come up like a red wave from Darfar. Her flight had been blind, into a country of which she was wholly ignorant, and now she wavered between an urge to ride directly to that city in the plain, and the instinct of caution which prompted her to skirt it widely and continue her solitary flight. Her thoughts were scattered by the rustling of the leaves below her. She wheeled cat-like, snatched at her sword, and then she froze motionless, staring wide-eyed at the man before her. He was almost a giant in stature, muscles rippling smoothly under his skin, which the sun had burned brown. His garb was similar to hers, except that he wore a broad leather belt instead of a girdle. Broadsword and poniard hung from this belt. "Conan! The Cimmerian!" ejaculated the woman. "What are you doing on my trail?" He grinned hardly, and his fierce blue eyes burned with a light any woman could understand as they ran over her magnificent figure, lingering on the swell of her splendid breasts beneath the light shirt, and the clear white flesh displayed between breeches and boot-tops. "Don't you know?" he laughed. "Haven't I made my admiration for you plain ever since I first saw you?" "A stallion could have made it no plainer," she answered disdainfully. "But I never expected to encounter you so far from the ale-barrels and meat-pots of Sukhmet. Did you really follow me from Zarallo's camp, or were you whipped forth for a rogue?" He laughed at her insolence, and flexed his mighty biceps. "You know Zarallo didn't have enough knaves to whip me out of camp," he grinned. "Of course I followed you. Lucky thing for you, too, wench. When you knifed that Stygian officer, you forfeited Zarallo's favor and protection, and you outlawed yourself with the Stygians." "I know it," she replied sullenly. "But what else could I do? You know what my provocation was." "Sure," he agreed. "If I'd been there, I'd have knifed him myself. But if a woman must live in the war camps of men, she can expect such things." Valeria stamped her booted foot and swore. "Why won't men let me live a man's life?" "That's obvious." Again his eager eyes devoured her. "But you were wise to run away. The Stygians would have had you skinned. That officer's brother followed you. Faster than you thought, I don't doubt. He wasn't far behind you when I caught up with him. His horse was better than yours. He'd have caught you and cut your throat within a few more miles." "Well?" she demanded. "Well, what?" He seemed puzzled. "What of the Stygian?" "Why, what do you suppose?" he returned impatiently. "I killed him, of course, and left his carcass for the vultures. That delayed me, though, and I almost lost your trail when you crossed the rocky spurs of the hills. Otherwise I'd have caught up with you long ago. And now you think you'll drag me back to Zarallo's camp," she sneered. "Don't talk like a fool," he grunted. "Come, girl, don't be such a spitfire. I'm not like that Stygian you knifed, and you know it." "A penniless vagabond," she taunted. He laughed at her. "What do you call yourself? You haven't enough money to buy a new seat for your breeches. Your disdain doesn't deceive me. You know I've commanded bigger ships and more men than you ever did in your life. As for being penniless, what rover isn't most of the time? I've squandered enough gold in the seaports of the world to fill a galleon. You know that, too." Where are the fine ships and the bold lads you commanded now? She sneered. At the bottom of the sea, mostly, he replied cheerfully. The Zingarans sank my last ship off the Shemite shore. That's why I joined Zaralo's free companions. But I saw I'd been stung when we marched to the Darfar border. The pay was poor and the wine was sour, and I don't like black women, and that's the only kind that came to our camp at Sukmet. Rings in their noses and their teeth filed. Bah! Why did you join Zaralo? Sukmet's a long way from saltwater. Red Ortho wanted to make me his mistress, she answered sullenly. I jumped overboard one night and swam ashore when we were anchored off the Kushite coast. Off Zabela it was. There a Shemite trader told me that Zaralo had brought his free companies south to guard the Darfar border. No better employment offered. I joined an eastbound caravan, and eventually came to Sukmet. It was madness to plunge southward as you did, commented Conan. But it was wise, too, for Zaralo's patrols never thought to look for you in this direction. Only the brother of the man you killed happened to strike your trail. And now what do you intend doing? She demanded. Turn west, he answered. I've been this far south, but not this far east. Many days traveling to the west will bring us to the open savannas, where the black tribes graze their cattle. I have friends among them. We'll get to the coast and find a ship. I'm sick of the jungle. Then be on your way, she advised. I have other plans. Don't be a fool. He showed irritation for the first time. You can't keep on wandering through this forest. I can if I choose. But what do you intend doing? That's none of your affair, she snapped. Yes, it is, he answered calmly. Do you think I followed you this far, to turn around and ride off empty-handed? Be sensible, wench. I'm not going to harm you. He stepped toward her, and she sprang back, whipping out her sword. Keep back, you barbarian dog. I'll spit you like a roast pig. He halted reluctantly, and demanded, Do you want me to take that toy away from you and spank you with it? Words. Nothing but words, she mocked, lights like the gleam of the sun on blue water dancing in her reckless eyes. He knew it was the truth. No living man could disarm Valeria of the Brotherhood with his bare hands. He scowled, his sensations a tangle of conflicting emotions. He was angry, yet he was amused and filled with admiration for her spirit. He burned with eagerness to seize that splendid figure and crush it in his iron arms, yet he greatly desired not to hurt the girl. He was torn between a desire to shake her soundly and a desire to caress her. He knew if he came any nearer, her sword would be sheathed in his heart. He had seen Valeria kill too many men in border forays and tavern brawls to have any illusions about her. He knew she was as quick and ferocious as a tigress. He could draw his broadsword and disarm her, beat the blade out of her hand, but the thought of drawing a sword on a woman, even without intent of injury, was extremely repugnant to him. Blast your soul, you hussy, he exclaimed in exasperation. I'm going to take off your... He started toward her, his angry passion making him reckless, and she poised herself for a deadly thrust. Then came a startling interruption to a scene at once ludicrous and perilous. What's that? It was Valeria who exclaimed, but they both started violently, and Conan wheeled like a cat, his great sword flashing into his hand. Back in the forest had burst forth an appalling medley of screams, the screams of horses in terror and agony. Mingled with their screams, there came the snap of splintering bones. Lions are slaying the horses, cried Valeria. Lions, nothing, snorted Conan, his eyes blazing. Did you hear a lion roar? Neither did I. Listen at those bones snap. Not even a lion could make that much noise killing a horse. He hurried down the natural ramp, and she followed, their personal feud forgotten in the adventurer's instinct to unite against common peril. The screams had ceased when they worked their way downward through the green veil of leaves that brushed the rock. I found your horse tied by the pool back there, he muttered, treading so noiselessly that she no longer wondered how he had surprised her on the crag. I tied mine beside it and followed the tracks of your boots. Watch, now! They had emerged from the belt of leaves and stared down into the lower reaches of the forest. Above them the green roof spread its dusky canopy. Below them the sunlight filtered in just enough to make a jade-tinted twilight. The giant trunks of trees less than 100 yards away looked dim and ghostly. "The horses should be beyond that thicket over there," whispered Conan, and his voice might have been a breeze moving through the branches. "Listen!" Valeria had already heard, and a chill crept through her veins, so she unconsciously laid her white hand on her companion's muscular brown arm. From beyond the thicket came the noisy crunching of bones and the loud rending of flesh, together with the grinding, slobbering sounds of a horrible feast. "Lions wouldn't make that noise," whispered Conan. "Something's eating our horses, but it's not a lion. Crom." The noise stopped suddenly, and Conan swore softly. A suddenly risen breeze was blowing from them directly toward the spot where the unseen slayer was hidden. "Here it comes," muttered Conan, half lifting his sword. The thicket was violently agitated, and Valeria clutched Conan's arm hard. Ignorant of jungle lore, she yet knew that no animal she had ever seen could have shaken the tall brush like that. "It must be as big as an elephant," muttered Conan, echoing her thought. "What the devil?" His voice trailed away in stunned silence. Through the thicket was thrust a head of nightmare and lunacy. Grinning jaws bared rows of dripping yellow tusks. Above the yawning mouth wrinkled a saurian-like snout. Huge eyes, like those of a python 1,000 times magnified, stared unwinkingly at the petrified humans clinging to the rock above it. Blood smeared the scaly, flabby lips and dripped from the huge mouth. The head, bigger than that of a crocodile, was further extended on a long scaled neck, on which stood up rows of serrated spikes, and after it, crushing down the briars and saplings, waddled the body of a titan, a gigantic barrel-bellied torso on absurdly short legs. The whitish belly almost raked the ground, while the serrated backbone rose higher than Conan could have reached on tiptoe. A long spiked tail, like that of a gargantuan scorpion, trailed out behind. "Back up the crag, quick!" snapped Conan, thrusting the girl behind him. "I don't think he can climb, but he can stand on his hind legs and reach us." With a snapping and rending of bushes and saplings, the monster came hurtling through the thickets, and they fled up the rock before him like leaves blown before a wind. As Valeria plunged into the leafy screen, a backward glance showed her the Titan rearing up fearsomely on his massive hind legs, even as Conan had predicted. The sight sent panic racing through her. As he reared, the beast seemed more gigantic than ever. His snouted head towered among the trees. Then Conan's iron hand closed on her wrist, and she was jerked headlong into the blinding welter of the leaves, and out again into the hot sunshine above, just as the monster fell forward with his front feet on the crag, with an impact that made the rock vibrate. Behind the fugitives, the huge head crashed through the twigs, and they looked down for a horrifying instant at the nightmare visage framed among the green leaves, eyes flaming, jaws gaping. Then the giant tusks clashed together futilely, and after that the head was withdrawn, vanishing from their sight as if it had sunk in a pool. Peering down through broken branches that scraped the rock, they saw it squatting on its haunches at the foot of the crag, staring unblinkingly up at them. Valeria shuddered. "How long do you suppose he'll crouch there?" Conan kicked the skull on the leaf-strewn shelf. "That fellow must have climbed up here to escape him, or one like him. He must have died of starvation. There are no bones broken. That thing must be a dragon, such as the black people speak of in their legends. If so, it won't leave here until we're both dead." Valeria looked at him blankly, her resentment forgotten. She fought down a surging of panic. She had proved her reckless courage 1,000 times in wild battles on sea and land, on the blood-slippery decks of burning warships, in the storming of walled cities, and on the trampled sandy beaches, where the desperate men of the Red Brotherhood bathed their knives in one another's blood in their fights for leadership. But the prospect now confronting her congealed her blood. A cutlass stroke in the heat of battle was nothing, but to sit idle and helpless on a bare rock until she perished of starvation, besieged by a monstrous survival of an elder age, the thought sent panic throbbing through her brain. "He must leave to eat and drink," she said helplessly. "He won't have to go far to do either," Conan pointed out. "He's just gorged on horse meat, and like a real snake, he can go for a long time without eating or drinking again." but he doesn't sleep after eating like a real snake, it seems. Anyway, he can't climb this crag." Conan spoke imperturbably. He was a barbarian, and the terrible patience of the wilderness and its children was as much a part of him as his lusts and rages. He could endure a situation like this with a coolness impossible to a civilized person. "Can't we get into the trees and get away, traveling like apes through the branches?" she asked desperately. He shook his head. "I thought of that. The branches that touch the crag down there are too light. They'd break with our weight. Besides, I have an idea that devil could tear up any tree around here by its roots." "Well, are we going to sit here on our rumps until we starve, like that?" she cried furiously, kicking the skull clattering across the ledge. "I won't do it! I'll go down there and cut his damned head off." Conan had seated himself on a rocky projection at the foot of the spire. He looked up with a glint of admiration at her blazing eyes and tense, quivering figure, but realizing that she was in just the mood for any madness, he let none of his admiration sound in his voice. "Sit down," he grunted, catching her by her wrist and pulling her down on his knee. She was too surprised to resist, as he took her sword from her hand and shoved it back in its sheath. "Sit still and calm down. You'd only break your steel on his scales. He'd gobble you up at one gulp, or smash you like an egg with that spiked tail of his. We'll get out of this jam some way, but we shan't do it by getting chewed up and swallowed." She made no reply, nor did she seek to repulse his arm from about her waist. She was frightened, and the sensation was new to Valeria of the Red Brotherhood. So she sat on her companion's, or captor's, knee, with a docility that would have amazed Zarallo, who had anathematized her as a she-devil out of Hell's Seraglio. Conan played idly with her curly yellow locks, seemingly intent only upon his conquest. Neither the skeleton at his feet, nor the monster crouching below disturbed his mind, or dulled the edge of his interest. The girl's restless eyes, roving the leaves below them, discovered splashes of color among the green. It was fruit, large, darkly crimson globes, suspended from the boughs of a tree, whose broad leaves were a peculiarly rich and vivid green. She became aware of both thirst and hunger, though thirst had not assailed her until she knew she could not descend from the crag to find food and water. "We need not starve," she said. "There is fruit we can reach." Conan glanced where she pointed. "If we ate that, we wouldn't need the bite of a dragon," he grunted. "That's what the black people of Kush call the apples of Derketa. Derketa is the queen of the dead. Drink a little of the juice, or spill it on your flesh, and you'd be dead before you could tumble to the foot of this crag." "Oh!" She lapsed into dismayed silence. There seemed no way out of their predicament, she reflected gloomily. She saw no way of escape, and Conan seemed to be concerned only with her supple waist and curly tresses. If he was trying to formulate a plan of escape, he did not show it. "If you'll take your hands off me long enough to climb up on that peak," she said presently, "you'll see something that will surprise you." He cast her a questioning glance, then obeyed with a shrug of his massive shoulders. Clinging to the spire-like pinnacle, he stared out over the forest roof.